India is now allowing 100% FDI across all sectors in automatic routes. About 18 to 19% of India's products go to the US. If you get the similar good at lower prices, consumers get. That's the fundamental thing of economics. India is now signing a lot of trade agreements. UK signed a free trade agreement actually very recently, with technological transfer being one of the key components. If you know Bangladesh's recent history in terms of the upliftment of poverty, it happened through trade actually. Only trading of one sector of goods, which is textile.
Can you briefly just give me a background into what the manufacturing industry is like in India and what influence China does have over this kind of trade openness or not?
Sure. So, see, India, in terms of the manufacturing sector, as of now, it produces about 16 to 17% of the GDP of India, and it gives about employment to 27 million workers. So, in terms of domestic production, it's quite important in India. In terms of the world value, it now hovers about 3.5 to 4% of the total exports of the world, where India exports in terms of the goods of the manufactured goods in terms of the total world exports. So it is not as far as big as China for sure, but it is somewhere around Turkey, where in terms of the developing economies. And in terms of the goods that India produces, India is a bit of diverse in a sense. It has key industries such as automotive, you have pharmaceuticals, you have engineering products, you have then you have textiles, you have consumer durables, you have leather. So these are the major industries where India has bigger employment and one of the biggest exporters in the world. And it is, I believe, one of the top three exporters in the EU and US. About 18 to 19% of India's products go to the US, as well as about 16% comes to the EU. So it is quite a big market in terms of the US and the EU. In terms of China's impact, see, when China came, and this started from 2001, when China became the member of the WTO and it had access to the world markets. And it's not only about India. There are like flurry of studies where it has been shown that China has a significant impact on the manufacturing industries. It's especially, let's say, the bigger economies, how the bigger economies adjust, especially the US. US, it has a flurry, extreme high amount of research. In a sense, a large amount of studies came out after China came to the WTO, that how it kind of influenced US economy in terms of from the manufacturing employment to the innovation to the political outcomes. Even the voting got changed after Chinese trade becoming booming to the US. So, and especially for the and also for the EU, also there are studies on the EU that China's exports similarly impacted the EU economies in certain ways or the other. So it's not only India. It had an impact, bigger impact, because it controls about 14% of world output, about 14% of the world export. So it's a big behemoth in terms of the manufacturing powerhouse China had become. In India, it was interesting in a sense because India and China, in terms of those, there is this index produced about a very influential paper to see which are the countries which are very close to technological frontier of China. And India is kind of the closest. So if I remember correctly, if China is the base, let's say China has 1, and India is about 0.93 of China. It's very, very close. And the second is Turkey, actually. So given that, if you, for example, two-person has very similar kind of technological production process, or very technological in a sense, very similar set of technological attributes, when I am allowing you to sell in my economy, that means the competition is very head to head. It's very intensifies because both of them has very similar set of skills. When you have similar set of skills, the competition becomes intensified. Always, because you are competing with someone with similar to you. So for India, it's a very head to head competition because they're very technologically similar countries. These two are. So that was kind of given kind of the background or the for us to look up how China could impact in terms of the Indian economy per se. I had a few other research as well in terms of looking at other questions, but prices and stuff is very interesting in a sense that because prices affect the overall economy, the consumers as well, because these are the what that you kind of go to the market and you see those prices and how come a competition from a singular country can affect these prices and of the farms, and was kind of the question that we wanted to look up.
Hmm. Yeah, it is interesting in that regard, right? Because to your point, in many ways, when I look at China and India, I think there's a lot of similarities in just their geographies, demographics, and all this kind of stuff into how they could have necessarily become big manufacturing powerhouses. And obviously, China ended up being the big manufacturing house of the world. But in many regards, right, they both have incredibly large populations in and around 1.3, 1.4 billion,
Billion.
very large landmass,
Mhm.
large coastal regions so they can export to the world, right near to a lot of the other developing countries in East Asia, on big trade routes. There's a lot of similarities in a lot of ways. Also, relatively poor,
Yep.
but sort of developing into middle income countries.
Mhm.
It's interesting that a lot of the manufacturing industry was so then dominant in China as opposed to India. And I think I remember talking to Professor Uma Kumbapati about this a little while ago. And I think something that resonated with when I was talking to her is that actually India has a little bit more of a hard time uh, administrating across its geography compared to China per se, because China is very much a command and control economy.
Yeah.
And that kind of means that over a large distances, you can kind of have uniform policy a little bit easier and administrate. Whereas India is a straight up democracy. It's the largest democracy. And you could make the argument it's the most influential, important democracy in the world because of, it's got the most people in the world at the moment,
Right.
1.4 billion. But because of that, it has a lot less control over its ability to administer across all those regions. And maybe that's part of the reason why it wasn't able to seize the manufacturing the way that China has. I don't know whether you agree with this or whether you've got some other thoughts on why this might have been the case.
So partially, yes. For example, so you're right, absolutely. Professor Kamampati is absolutely right in a sense that because China operates in a completely different fashion that India does, because it has a obviously command and control approach, but it has kind of a policy that a center can take, which can be implemented because at the regional and local level, which is not the case for India. For example, India's labor policies are state driven. It is purview of the state, but not the center. So when you and labor policies, and we have been shown significant labor policies which are very restrictive in nature, kind of hinders growth. If you cannot hire or you cannot expand your production given, or you cannot contract your production given what the competition is, it's very difficult for a firm or a company kind of grow or to contract in a sense because you in it's a churning that matters in the long run because you have to grow and contract given how you have to operate in the sector, that you have to diversify or not diversify given what is going on. So these are the laws, kind of one example of it. These are the one kind of laws which kind of is not having a parity across different regions of India. And there are
Sure. Yeah.
many other reasons why it cannot be the reason. I'm not going into the reasons here because
Sure.
there
Yeah.
could be innumerable number of reasons which are kind of restricting not to be have a single policy on this. Most of it is political. A large part of it is political. Let's not go into there. But there are economic reasons as well, because there are, as you said, large part of poor people who are part of the informal sector, which are much protected in terms of the labor laws and stuff. So a lot of convoluted stuff in a sense to implement a law and to get it the law done at the regional level. So that's one challenge India faces as opposed to China, which has similar kind of approach. One, if one policy has been taken, it would be distributed across the entire China, which makes it easier in a sense to kind of have a central policy and see its effect at the regional level.
Mm.
But it's not per se for India. This is one, and there are many other reasons. There are many other economic reasons. There are administrative reasons for sure. Um, um, there is recently a paper called coming out called "No Country for Dying Farm," because it's very difficult in India for this purely for administrative reasons. There's nothing to do with anything else. That if you are not operating in a certain sector or any sector, it's very difficult to exit your industry
Mm.
just purely because of administrative reasons. You cannot just go to liquidate your farm, go and say, give back the money and just close your doors and go back. It doesn't happen in India. And that kind of has a greater impact in a sense of misallocation. Let's say I am a dying farm, and if I don't cannot compete with right now with anyone because I cannot produce, I don't have that competitive edge because I have to. There are some laws that I have to kind of go by. For that, I cannot close. For which I have to get credit from the bank. These credits are misallocated. This could be gone for better efficient farms, where these are being kept for these inefficient farms. These are purely administrative reasons why India, in certain cases, there's a large part of the economy we do not get allocation in resources to efficient farms because of purely administrative reasons. I don't
Yeah.
see any other reason that is actually binding them not to do it.
Yeah. Because you need resources to administer those things, and it's such a big geography and such a diverse set of. India is also probably a lot more culturally mixed and diverse than maybe
Right.
sort of China is. I mean, China's a very big country, it's population size, but it's also very sort of almost culturally
Right,
similar.
so like 80% of Chinese people like are ethnically are Han, so it's very
Mm,
easier for them culturally to kind of get the message done. Whereas
sure.
India is extremely diverse in terms of culturally to get any message done across different borders. India used to be now it's getting better. That used to be have very different tax policies across different regions. So when a good crosses border, state border from one border to another, you have to give one tax or the other. There are multiple taxes. You have to fill multiple papers.
Oh,
Well,
okay. Even within the borders, within the
even with
country.
like from one state to another, if you are even like a 10-kilometer distance and there's a state border in between, you have to give like fill up multiple pages of forms, give lot of tax,
Yeah.
different kinds
And
of taxes.
just outside the cost, I mean, just the
Exactly.
administration
So
on side
that
of
it
that. Yeah.
disincentivizes farms to kind of go and sell out. Why should you? And because there's an added cost to all of this. Now there is this tax reform has been done, and is being done and is being simplified so that farms can sell across their borders, so that these kind of changes, all these administrative changes kind of go down very slowly, because this should not, it should be business friendly in a certain sense to let farms do businesses across not only your own state or regions, across different states and regions, because that means you are making farms more localized rather than globalized in a sense, even in terms of the India as well.
Yeah. I think
And
that, no, honestly, I think that I wasn't aware of that. And honestly, I think that explains quite a bit of all the contextual stuff like I say, I was talking about with Professor Kambapati and stuff. That's, I think, yeah, I imagine that's an absolute nightmare having to do that between states and stuff, which is probably just not a thing they have to do in China and stuff. To bring it back to trade policy, though, Currently, but also maybe like a little bit of historic, just like the last like however many years. How open to trade has India been, generally speaking? Has it been quite trade protectionist, or has it been quite trade open in its policies?
So India was one of the most restrictive trade regime of the world.
Oh, really?
Yes. Um, Before 1991, when India had this, because of many reasons, because of the price of the oil of the Gulf War, because of the murder of then terrorist assassination of then the prime minister, um, um, and um, foreign reserves going depleted. India went to the IMF to kind of had a stabilization package, and one of the conditions of the IMF was to de- you have to liberalize the economy in a sense of dropping the tariffs. So before, I give you an example, before 1991, one of the India's peak tariffs was more than 200%. Like the peak tariffs. The average tariff before 1991, India had about 150%, around
Really?
150, 1 to
The
450.
average?
The average tariff is very, very high because
Wow.
India wanted to this import substitution economy, which didn't work much. But then it started significantly dropping tariffs, especially in the 1990s. So around, let's say, 2005 and 6, after 15 years of the liberalization procedure, which after that it kind of slowed down, India, an average tariff, India has about 30 to 35%, depends on the sector. So it's still I would say quite a bit high tariffs in terms of if you see other kind of similar countries which have much lower tariffs,
Mhm.
which ranges, if you see Brazil, Turkey, China, and all this, you have a range of tariffs about 15 to 20%, where India has a bit more than the similar countries, similar countries which trade in the world region. So India still is open now, much more open in terms of trading with the world, but used to be not. Used to be up even some of the tariffs, as is like the some of the tariffs, especially in if high fancy cars, India, if it comes to the top of my mind, India still has about 125% tariffs.
That's certainly a lot. Sounds like
Certainly
Trump's.
huge. Like you are giving w- almost 2.5 times of the price of the car.
Yeah, it's crazy. Sounds like I don't know. Sounds like Trump's dream, honestly, at the moment, by the sounds of it. The 150% plus tariffs.
Yes, for other goods, it has substantially come down for
Sure.
sure.
And so you were saying it's around sort of 30%, 25,
20 to
30%
35% depends on the
at the
sector,
moment.
but on average, around 25%, 30%.
Sure. And is that common for? It sounds like it's more common for developing countries. How are average tariff rates for maybe sort of more Western or more developed countries? So we're in a bit of a weird
It's
period
all
at the moment. In fairness, with like the America being in the situation that it is, but typically speaking,
yes. Typically speaking,
what's the
let's
average
say
tariff rate been?
yes, below 10%. So about
Below
5%, which
10%.
we see
Okay.
on average any advanced economy, we'll see a tariff about an average tariff ranges between 4 to 8% max.
Wow. And is that because the more developed countries have more mature, developed industries, and so they're a little bit less worried about foreign competition in certain regards, whereas developing countries are maybe more concerned about really wanting to try and develop domestic industries that can compete on a global scale. So they want to put those kind of tariffs. But is that a kind of reason, or is it something else?
No, this is one reason for sure, because in a developing countries, a lot of, as I said, a lot of person are kind of have a specific skill set, which are kind of dependent on their jobs, which they are doing. And if something happens on their job, they are kind of unemployed for a long term, where there's not so much of social protection being given in a developing country. Here, where in an advanced economy, there's if you leave your or if you the unions are strong, especially in the UK, for example, we have a very strong union, labor union, in a sense. In fact, the labor laws are very employee friendly rather than employer friendly. Um, uh, until and unless we go back to the regime of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, where were very different, in a sense, privatizing the mines and everything. People were on the streets rioting because a lot of people lost their jobs without social protection much, but otherwise labor laws were kind of employee friendly, and there are options to switch your career, in kind of getting skilled again and switching your career, because a lot of skilling programs happens in the advanced economy, which are very kind of restricted in the developing economies. You do not find much of skilling programs. When you lose your job, you go to a skill program in a different for a different sector. And so all these reasons, these are more or less restrictive, because a lot of employment is kind of dependent on those industries. So, and also the other reason could be like, especially for so European Union is, let's say, it's kind of because the technological levels are very similar in certain sense. Because there's a lot of technological transfer agreements, if you know about this, there's a lot of technological transfer agreements between European Union and the countries. If you have a similar kind of technology, I can use it, and these kind of helps you. If you have a similar technology, then the threat of the competition, in a sense, because the workers also can move much
Mhm.
between the countries, and that becomes much less of a threat when you allow foreign goods to come in. And obviously, you're right that your domestic manufacturing or domestic industries are very mature to take on the competition. There are educated people which kind of take on the competition, as a which know how to take on the competition, which know when there is competition how to kind of get on to which kind of goods I should produce, which kind of inputs I should kind of use to boost up my productivity, or do some savings, save some marginal, use better inputs in terms of production process. So all these are there in kind of helps out to have much lower tariffs, in order to have a much open region to trade with the world.
Right, sure. Oh, and anyway, in terms of like lowering tariffs, particularly in India, this kind of leads into the paper that you conducted that was kind of looking at, to my understanding, when these sort of tariff policies were sort of lowered in regards to China was able to come in and sort of reduce prices in some regard. Can you just talk to me about sort of the background of the paper a little bit and sort of the
Mhm.
objectives and what you were trying to achieve?
So what we look at is basically how Chinese inputs, because when I'm opening up an economy, I'm getting, like, I'm importing from a lot of countries. So what we look at specifically, the Chinese share of imports, which is now a big, huge part of the economy. So give you an example, in 1996, India used to import about 5% of their entire imports from China. It increased to 18% by 2007. So more than 300% growth within just 11 years. Now, one third of the entire manufacturing imports comes from China. 33% of all the imports, manufacturing goods, comes only from China. So China plays a much bigger role in terms of the import scenario of Indian economy. So given one country which plays such a big role, especially after starting from 2001 onwards, when China became the member of the WTO, we wanted to look up whether, because when there you have competitive pressures, what the firms do. Because if you are in a competitive pressure, in a which is a head to head competition in certain sense, or which is, but you have to understand, India and China are not competing in a very high price market. They are producers of low price products. So both are competing in a low price products, not very high quality products in certain sense. So what happens if such competition is allowed to hit the Indian market? How the farms do react? Because one way the farms can react is called dropping their markups, that your market power is going away because you have a competition with someone else. You cannot charge a lot of markups on your product. And that's in traditional trade, international trade theory, we call pro competitive effects. that when you have competition, you kind of gain, consumer actually gains from competition. As a consumer, there are different parts of it. As a consumer, you gain from the competition because you are getting now goods at a much lower prices. The market power of certain firms has gone away. For example, if you know monopoly, if you are in a monopolistic economy, firms have the highest power and they charge as much as markups they would like. Right? So when you have a competition, your markups is going down, and you kind of you have a mm, lower prices for the economy, and these are the bigger implications. But as a consumer, this is a big welfare gains that happens
Sure.
because you are getting similar product at much lower prices. So it's
Yep.
a big large gains that happens for overall effect. You can use the uh, same money for other uses, right? So that was, and the other one is if you are, and there are two. You have to understand when there is when there inputs are coming, there are two types of inputs that comes in. One is the final goods, that I'm importing final goods. Let's say I'm importing this hoodie and just selling it, for example. And the other type of inputs, we call it inputs, intermediate inputs. I import certain material from China and use it in my final production to produce the good and sell it. So there are two types of inputs that comes in an economy. And these has opposite effects because one gives you direct competition. Let's say I am producer of a hood. I just import this hoodie. I directly import this hoodie and sell it. Now you import the cotton of this hoodie, for example, from somewhere. You produce the hoodie in India and you sell it. So these are two different kind of, and imports would affect them very differently. Because
Sure.
one, when I am selling it, I have a direct, or someone who is selling the hoodie has a, or a farm who is, when you are selling the hoodie, you have a direct competition with me when selling the, because I'm directly importing that at a lower
Sure.
price from other
Yeah.
country. But when you are importing the cotton, you do not have a competition with of that importing of the cotton. You're using the cotton in your production function, producing the good. So it has completely different effects on the markups, on the costs, and on the prices.
Yeah.
And that's what
Also,
we find.
I guess also from productivity standpoint as well, because it
Yes,
sounds it's
yes.
probably more productive to take something that you probably weren't getting before at a certain price and then changing it, adding value.
Mhm.
That's and you're probably getting more value add as well from doing that as well. So it probably has different
Exactly.
effects in terms.
So exactly. So here you raised an important point is the productivity. So their productivity comes, or for in economics, productivity generally comes from marginal cost. How efficient are you in producing that good? That's what your productivity is. Productivity is basically, in a layman's term, productivity is the amount of output produced divided by the number of inputs you use. That's a very simple explanation. But productivity actually generates from the marginal cost. How easily, or when you are producing more of the products of the same products, how less and less of the cost that you're adding to producing the similar product. That's why bigger farms, the biggest of the farms or the MNCs, has the highest profits because it has the lowest marginal cost of what they produce. They produce it best. That's why the gap between the cost and the prices are very high. That's why the profits are very high. The markups are how high because they produce the best thing. They know how to produce what they produce at the least cost possible, but very efficiently.
Sure.
So marginal, so because these intermediate inputs has a strong effect on the way you producing goods because it helps you reducing your marginal cost. If you are importing very good quality inputs from outside, it actually helps you reducing your marginal cost.
Hmm.
Now, if it helps reducing your marginal cost, what happens is that means you're saving some of your cost now. Now the question comes in, do you pass on that cost to the consumer in terms of reducing the prices or not? How much do you pass on? We call the pass through, we call it in economics pass through of cost savings to prices. Most of the cases, what we see is we always see incomplete pass through. That whatever the farm saves on producing the good does not pass on to the consumer. So
Sure.
it's always incomplete. If I save 20% in terms of importing something on my cost, I do not drop my prices by 20%.
No, you might drop it by 10 and then keep the other
Exactly.
10%
So
as
that's why
extra
your
profit.
markups
Yeah.
would increase a bit because of the intermediate inputs, but not with the final products. This is only purely because your intermediate inputs are making yourself more efficient to produce a good at much lower cost,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
But if you're a final good producer, you are directly reducing. When I am selling this hoodie directly, I have to reduce my. So there are two opposite effects continuously going on.
Interesting.
That in
Because
one way, I am reducing, my cost is getting reduced, but I'm not passing this to the consumer. So the markup remains. But on the other hand, let's say I am a wholesaler or a retailer, for example. I am importing this hoodie from China and I'm directly selling it. And you are making this hoodie, but just only importing cotton from China and selling this. How do you compete? Your effect and my effect is completely different because of Chinese imports.
sure. And I think from what I understand, and you'll
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but from looking at the work that your paper did, it seems as though the additional competition from reduced tariffs from with cheaper Chinese imports seem to have resulted in lower profit margins. So companies basically having to just lower it in order to compete with the Chinese companies, as opposed to the raw inputs becoming cheaper, and as a result, things becoming cheaper.
Yes. So see, the profits, yes, but the mechanism of reducing profits here is the markups.
Hmm.
Because your markups are going down, your profits would go down. Because markups generate profits. The higher the markups are, the higher the profits are. Because the markups is basic. So imagine, price can be divided into two parts in economics. If price is one, but it can be divided into two components. One is the markups and one is the marginal cost. So marginal cost plus markups gives you the prices, right? So if your marginal cost is going down, and even if your prices remain the same, you can maintain the same markups. Actually, markups might go up actually
Hmm.
in certain sense. Because even if you keep your prices very similar, your markups might go up. Imagine if your price is 4, your markups is 2, and your marginal cost is 2, for example, your marginal cost, because you're using new inputs, cheaper inputs, marginal cost going down to 1.8, for example, 20% drop. Your markups, even if you keep the prices similar, for example, 4, your markups now go up to 2.2
Right.
to keep the similar
So,
prices. But sometimes, so what happens is, so this is one effect that happens because of the import of inputs. But if you're directly inputting the final goods, which is what we show two different effects actually, we show the overall effect as well. What we show is that the prices for the final products, input of final products are going down, but the prices are going down because markups are going down for the farms. But the prices are also going down much less because of the intermediate inputs, because the farms are saving a lot because of the drop in marginal cost. Overall, there is an effect. Overall, there is a 20% drop in prices we show that. But this drop in prices comes from the drop in the markups. The markups drop a lot rather than the marginal cost. The marginal cost, exactly, the marginal cost actually drop by a lot. Sorry, the markups drop a lot rather than the marginal cost. That's why your prices get dropped a lot.
sure. And so, what are the effects on, generally speaking, on the Indian economy? It sounds as though prices for consumers are improved because they're
Mhm.
getting goods or comparable goods at a cheaper rate. But is there potentially, because of this drop in markups, is it potentially less profitable for the economy as a whole with regards to this competition, or have there been some other effects?
So, for the overall economy, so see, there are two, three parts here. When we talk about the economy, there are two, three parts. So, in terms of the overall gains from the economy, it can be divided into three. One is the producer's gain or loss. One is the tariff revenues that the government get from the inputs, because as a consumer or a farm has to give, when a farm is importing it, it has to give this tariffs to the government actually.
Hmm.
So, and the other part is the consumer loss or gain. So these three actually gives you the overall economy loss or gain, for example, right? So in this case, what happened was we do not look at the producer's gain or loss, because that's a much bigger question to look at producer's gain or loss and the overall tariff revenue. But what we look at is the Chinese, because the Chinese inputs, the consumers gain a lot. We as a consumer gains goes up significantly. Every consumer is having a 20% loss. So for the overall economy, we need to actually it goes actually where I'm taking a one step jump in about the thinking about a bigger question for the Indian economy or in terms of Chinese competition, that what happens to the overall economy, whether the producers loss in this case, because they had to forego some parts of the profit because the markups is dropping for sure. There is producers profits going down there, but is that greater than the consumer loss or consumers gain, because their consumers has absolutely gained here with the drop in prices. So whether this is gain of loss happens what way is a bigger question actually to determine in certain case, in this case, and this has like bigger implications in terms of economic policies in the long run. And how do you set the tariffs, how do you kind of play the game in terms of how much is the optimal tariffs,
Yeah,
is that amount of tariffs helping out in terms of the overall economy? Are we gaining as an economy or not? Because when we looking at only the consumer surplus or consumer gain, or on not only the producer, is kind of a partial, we call it partial equilibrium approach. That's what the paper does. We only look at the partial equilibrium approach, where we look at only the gains for the consumer, which is kind of the prices. Prices drop in economics. It's very simple. Consumer gains happens through drop in price. If you get the similar good at lower prices, consumers gain. That's the fundamental thing of economics in terms of. So that's what we show, that the consumers gain because there's a 20% drop in prices. But whether this 20% drop in prices is outweighed by 20% drop, let's say 20%, if I take this example, that 20% drops in prices, let's say, give a consumer about 5% gain in their income, for example. Whether this has been outweighed by drop in profits by the firms or not, that's a bigger question. It's very difficult to tell for a general equilibrium question. If I comment something, it will be very out of hunch. I do not have numbers in per se to say whether as an economy India gain or not. Consumers, for sure, they have gained because of the Chinese competition.
sure.
Producers, we yes, in one aspect we can absolutely say it has gained, because we clearly see there has been a drop in the marginal cost of the farms, that now the producers have gained, producers of the similar kind of output have gained access to better inputs, but this helped them to produce new goods at lower marginal cost. So also that also helped. So when you are talking about the entire economy, all of these things has to be taken into consideration. I am gaining as when I'm producing. I am losing when I'm selling.
Gotcha. So, and out of curiosity, then, why is it that you found in the paper that standalone firms seem to have responded more strongly than to other types of firms specifically?
Exactly. So first, again, as I mentioned before, you have to understand this. What happens is this is a very low price competition that is happening because that's what China kind of started with, right? Now it's not. China has significantly, if you now follow China's growth path, China has significantly shifted their production processes, everything to a much higher valued manufacturing. In fact, the highest amount of AI patents in the world is owned by not US, is China. So China has significantly changed their production process over the time. But when it hit it, when it came out in the world market, it was flood of low price. You used to have these low price Chinese products. So now you have these business groups which have these internal pools of capital. You have much higher appeal of their because these are bigger firms. You have much goodwill in the market. You have much higher appeal of your products in the market. And these produce sufficiently better high quality products. The bigger firms, which are business group firms. So here, you have to understand here, the Chinese competition is much less rather than the firms which are produce standalone small, medium-sized firms, which are getting hit by the Chinese competition much more. And they have much lesser appeal for their products. They have much less internal pool of capital, much less efficient managers. For example, you have bigger business group farms where you have much better managers to kind of know what strategy to take when you are hit with the competition. So that's why the business group firms actually they also drop their markups, but much lesser than the standalone firms. Because the standalone firms is much hit higher, has a higher hit of the competition rather than the business group firms. And
Yeah.
this is not like we show it because of the competition, but there is this research by Tarun Khanna from Harvard Business School. He shows basically that the business good firms is always react to shocks very differently than standalone firms. We took it to trade, and we show that even in terms of trade, this is actually true that they react very differently because of the certain organizational aspects of them, how they are organized. But his research kind of holds true for in terms of trade shock as well for India.
Got you. And looking at maybe some other countries in the region, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or others kind of similar developing countries, has there also been this push or has there been an acceptance to have more open trade policy, or has there been more, have they taken a slightly different path in becoming maybe a little bit more trade protectionist?
So I don't think Bangladesh has, as far as I know, Bangladesh and Pakistan, they haven't taken any trade protectionist policy in certain sense or the other. In the recent times, they are much more. In fact, Bangladesh has become much more open in terms of trade because if you know Bangladesh's recent history in terms of the upliftment of poverty, many people, it happened through trade actually, only trading of one sector of goods, which is textile. So because textile dominates Bangladesh's
Yeah,
entire
absolutely. Yeah.
industry, and but trade because of international trade, especially exports, millions of people has been gained out of poverty, has been
Hmm.
uplifted out of poverty just through exporting of one sector of goods. So I'm not very sure they hasn't taken any kind of protectionist policies in the recent times. Although India started with it. So if I remember, since you said that in 2014, when the current government, which is in the central government, which is in the power right now, which came in 2014, first after a long time, they actually one of their agenda was to boycott Chinese products because a lot of Indian businesses were hit because of the Chinese products. They wanted to take some protectionist policies, but in the end, they never took any protectionist policy. Maybe that was the election something, slogan or something, but that was one of their agendas in terms of taking certain protectionist policies against China, but it never materialized in certain sense. Because as I said, economy is very much dependent on Chinese in terms of goods. 33% of that, all the manufacturing products comes from only from China. So one third of its
Mhm.
economy is only dependent on one country, actually. And
Sure.
now, if you think about actually now what is happening, I just saw the news last week, is because of Trump's policies, what is happening, there are regional collaborations happening. India and China used to have a bit of disputes across the border because of certain historical stuff. Now, and there were certain restrictions in terms of how much Indians can invest in China, and in Chinese also can invest in Indian companies. Now they are actually allowing easy visas across Chinese and Indians. They are allowing Chinese investments to come to India in terms of investments in companies. So all this because of the trans policies and regional, more regional trade things, trade unprotectionism is actually happening.
Mm.
And there is this interesting diagram that after Trump came, this is from 2016 onwards, by the way, not when first Trump came, the trade between, because he started with the Trump tariffs from 2018, right? That the first set of Trump tariffs came. The trade between, if you divide with the developing and the developed countries, the trade within the developing countries is starting growing up after the Trump tariffs came in, because one of the Trump's agenda was if you remember, they tried he kind of one set of policies were that if you trade more within the, so there's this economic coalition called BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and there are other countries now they have joined. UAE have joined, Egypt have joined, and there are other countries have joined that economic bloc. So he was saying because there was been increase in the trade actually going up between these small economic coalitions because of this distorted tariffs, regional collaboration started happening. So protection actually in these countries, protectionism actually going down in terms
Mm.
of the developing countries. It is the
Sure.
is this I guess because of Trump tariffs, that protectionism happening from developed to developing countries.
Yeah, yeah.
Now they're trying to trade more within their own set of economic blocks, where
Mm.
trade is much easier because trade has proved to be much more gainer in the long run. For example, if if you know about the current tariffs of Trump, the US economy, the agricultural imports, because once Trump came up with tariffs, China slapped equal tariffs on US and slapped actually huge amount of tariffs on agricultural sector of the US. The US had, the US farmers had 44 billion drop in agricultural exports, which Trump gave a package of 12 billion, 11 billion only to kind of bail you out. So imagine you have lost £1 and I am giving you 25 pence to say that all everything is okay and done. Uh, so this is because this is what happens when you slap down protectionism. Because what is happening is as a consumer you are lost, you are in a loss now. In fact, this is a producer's loss as well, because you are losing out 75 pence of your or pence there of your every $1 income
Mm.
that used to have because of certain random tariffs came up. So protectionism actually, it has been shown over time that protectionism not always benefits people. It depends. I'm not saying you have to have complete free trade across every sector. It doesn't happen that way. Not
Sure.
every sector trades very freely, but you have to understand where you can freely trade, where you can't freely trade. You have to have strategic tariffs rather than random tariffs.
No, certainly. And there's things that you would probably want that are more, you maybe want to be more trade protectionist on that maybe have other implications outside of economic stuff. So, for
Mhm.
example, you probably want to try and have at least some domestic production of food just in case of like, pandemics, whatever, global supply lines, things like energy,
Exactly.
for other reasons other than just economy, that could just be political, it could be military, all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, trade protectionism does tend to sort of limit these kind of things. Do you see, given the effects of what India's trend has been in terms of reducing trade protectionism and tariffs. What do you see for India moving forward? Is it going to become much freer, much more open, or is it going to be a slightly different approach?
Yes, no, no. India is becoming so. India is now allowing like 100% FDI across all sectors in automatic routes. Um, India is now signing, if you know, India is now signing a lot of trade agreements. Where UK signed a free trade agreement actually with
Yeah, I
India
think so. Yeah,
very recently, with technological transfer being one of the key component between UK and India, which would obviously help more on the Indian perspective rather than the UK perspective in certain sense. But in UK also it helps because imagine during the COVID, as you mentioned, COVID, the vaccine that we had here is actually manufactured in Pune in India. We had the molecule here, and but it was manufactured because we didn't have the manufacturing capacity in the UK here. So it was manufactured in India. Um, so these kind of relations actually kind of for India, it would help in the long run for having strategically, obviously, to have much more better economic coalitions with countries where it can kind of exports, because exports is one that we have seen, also imports of intermediate goods, also the other channel we have seen in the research that actually helps economies to grow out of from the middle income to the upper middle income. China is one such example. Like trade, but China started much earlier, because if you look back to China, China is kind of started in the late 70s onwards to start liberalizing their economy significantly. From 80s onwards, they started growing uh, a lot, about 10% rate for a longer amount of time. And this is a happened through manufacturing goods, where kind of a lot of your employment it's dependent on. In India, is still not the case. India has a large portion of their employment is dependent on on manufacturing. But India, how it happened was India is much more open towards services. Somehow India kind of jumped the gun. Now it is taking trying to steps back, generally in kind of the old theory of development, which came out of the way and we understand economy, in a sense that we go from the agriculture to the manufacturing to the services, in a kind of jumped a step to went to services. India is much higher player in terms of services in the world economy, in terms of exporting of services, in terms of, for example, or importing of services. For example, recently, and it's growing more services, because recently what happened was, since again Trump put this H-1B visas on the skilled workers, a lot of money when the farm is applying for H-1B visa. Google just exported a lot of jobs to India. That's it.
Hmm.
So you cannot restrict farms to do jobs. They would find out ways.
Gotcha.
If
Yeah,
I cannot bring people here, I'll just export the jobs there, and that's it. And how do you tariff that? You cannot tariff that. You don't know how these services are being exported. So the point being, the India is much a bigger player in terms of services, but not so it's manufacturing. So it should be much more open in terms of manufacturing, in terms of FDI, because FDI also significantly have shown has led to a lot of productivity gains in the
Hmm.
long run, because a lot of technology transfer of foreign culture as well. It has been shown, for example, in Taiwan, in Korea, that whenever a foreign subsidiary has taken over a company, the work culture or the employment of female workers are actually went up, because they transfer their own culture to the local one.
Interesting.
The-
But is that specifically Western though? Because I would imagine that, for example, women in the workforce, like, is that same effect going to happen with FDI from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or
No, no,
some
no,
of,
absolutely not. No, no, no,
right?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. So again, it depends on overall. I'm giving an example. It depends on from
Sure,
the
in the aggregate, yeah.
in the aggregate.
But
There
I would
would be
imagine
a
that's
lot.
because it's becoming from America, Germany, UK,
Exactly.
these other countries, right?
These are the countries you have one kind of, let's say, one kind of gains in
Hmm.
overall economy. From the other economy, you gain from other ways. Let's say, I don't know how much. Let's say from let's say, for example, from Saudi Arabia, you might gain more in terms of the oil producing stuff, um,
Energy knowledge, yeah.
energy stuff, because they know how to kind of do the fossil fuel at the top level. So this kind of technology transfer can happen more. And now India is also all because of the distorted tariffs happening. India is also kind of making more relations with the Middle East, in a sense, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in terms of services, manufacturing, writing agreements, all of
And Saudi's doing a lot of investment, generally speaking, across the globe
exactly.
now, anyway, through their sovereign wealth fund and stuff. So, and obviously geographically much nearer as well. So, for things like shipping and imports, there's
It's
decreased
much
costs for all
easier.
those
It's
kind of
much
things.
less cost for them, because from India to go to for the Middle East is much easier to ship any good. So in that respect, I guess what I my understanding is from the economy, what I see is getting much more open rather than is taking protectionism measures, because protectionism's kind of at the random protectionism kind of leaves you at a loss. And
Sure.
strategic protectionism, no, because when you're having strategic protectionism, then you're backing up with other kind of policies, industrial policies, for example.
Counterbalance it, probably.
So let's say you don't want to encourage, let's say in technology transfer, sometimes you want to encourage domestic R&D. It all
Mhm.
actually helps the economy in terms of encouraging domestic R&D to give tax rebates on R&Ds. If you do R&D, I give you tax rebates. So that helps the local economy as well. So these kind of strategic industrial policies, backed up industrial policies with strategic protectionism, help the economy, but not random protectionism, putting tariffs on everything, and
Just
that's
blanket,
not
yeah,
going
yeah.
to help out the economy, overall economy, anywhere. Um, and
Yeah,
then in
no.
the age of globalization, and we're getting more globalized than ever before, and now. I'm a 90s kid, and when I grew up, and then the things I saw in 2000s, my exposure and my everything got changed with the globalization that happened as well. And it would be more, I guess, in the long run, in certain sense.
Yeah, no, certainly. Um, Pavel, honestly, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there, just to wrap up with, is there any research you would like to see conducted in the future that you think could better build upon, well, maybe your research, but honestly, the other
Mhm.
research that's out there in the industry? Is there almost like a bit of a black hole for a bit of research area that you think really needs a lot more work?
Yes, yes.
Or where is there a piece of research you think that could be, or a research area that would be really value adding?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are two things in mind. I have actually most of it's centered around this, and I discussed a bit of this. So I want to actually, now we are thinking about these bigger questions about whether is because India had this long time after 1991, India had a bigger path of going towards liberalized economy in terms of dropping the tariffs, backed up with industrial policy, certain level of industrial policy. So one question that I have looked up is not being addressed is whether this last, let's say, 20 years of liberalization, what has been the effect for the Indian economy? So it's, again, it's a bigger question. So you have to put all these sub-components. It's not a partial equilibrium approach. It's a general equilibrium question, that whether what has been for the economy, whether as an economy, because which plays certainly a important role in the world economy in terms of after it came as a liberalized economy from the 1990s onwards, its services, its manufacturing, whatever you put it, whether as an economy it has gained because of the liberalization, whether protectionism or liberalization actually gains as overall as an economy. This is a bigger question that I would like to kind of go into and see. Consumer gains has gained, or there's a producer's loss when there's foreign players coming in, or where producers have become more efficient and they're saving more in terms of producing a good. They used to produce a good before much higher cost than before, because now I have better technologies to produce good. So whether all of these, when I put together all of these together in a framework, whether I could find overall gains or not? This would be kind of the bigger question that and it takes time to kind of go into these bigger questions, but this is my plan in the next couple of years to go into these bigger questions to understand what has been the structural change, because there has been a structural change of the economy. It has changed. And because of the structural change, it has gained or not. What has been the, whether there's consumer gain, whether there's producers gain, who dominates, or there is overall gains. I don't know. And this is good. This would be my agenda for the next couple of years, actually.
No, I think that's be a really important research area to look at. Pavel, thank you very much for your time. I
Thank
really,
you.
really
Thank you,
appreciate you.
Max. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation.